Hello, I'm Joel Blackford with Beth Hesed Sabbath Fellowship from St. Paul, Minnesota, and this is number 8 of our Biblical, Historic, and Prophetic Patterns series. This is a series where I've showed you the 6,000-year pattern, that patterns like the creation time frame, where you have the 6 days of creation and then the 7th day of rest. We've shown you the 2,000-year increments, the 1,000-year increments, the 700-year Enoch increments, the Shemitah 7-year increments, the 50-year Jubilee increments. We've shown you Daniel 9 and the increments there, and then the historical patterns from Bullinger of 490 years, and then forward after the temple fell in 70 AD, the 4 patterns that lead you up to 2030. We've shown you all of these different patterns. Now this is kind of the kitchen sink time because we've covered so many other things. This is more random this time, so let's go through and show you some of these things, but keep in mind, things repeat. They rhyme, they repeat. The patterns do. Historical situations are not exactly the same. Hitler was not the same as Haman in the Purim story. He's a different human being, but the spirit remains the same, and these patterns remain the same. We love God for a period of time, then we fall away from God, then he chastises us, and we love God, and it goes in these historic patterns, and they repeat, they rhyme, they repeat. Everything is wearisome, more than one can express. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, the ear is not filled up with hearing. What has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done. And there is nothing new under the sun. There something which is to be said? See, this is new. It existed already in the ages before us. No one remembers the people of long ago, and those who come to come will not be remembered by those who come after them. So keep in mind the word preterism is in the middle of this verse from Ecclesiastes, from Solomon, probably the wisest man, but also a type, an archetype of the Antichrist, according to Mark Biltz, who is a friend of mine. Preterism is listed because preterism says, nope, those things in the Bible, they happened 70 AD, it's all done, everything's done. No, it's not. Keep in mind that things are going to repeat again. Patterns will repeat. Whatever you saw from the Maccabean situation with Antiochus walking in there and thinking he's an epiphany and slaughtering a pig, well, you'll see something similar to that probably in your lifetime as the Antichrist, I call him the beast, as he shows up in Revelation 13 and he shows up in your lives at some point in time in the near to distant future. What should we expect going forward? You will experience dramatic cosmic and societal changes before Jesus returns. You will experience much more persecution and tribulations before Jesus returns. More wars will break out, and you're seeing some of those things happen right now. You will experience a restarted sacrificial system. Get used to it. It's in the Bible. When you see in Daniel that the holy is stopped, that's by the Antichrist. It's not by the Jewish people that are trying to start it out right now. You may not see a temple. You might see a tabernacle, or as I say in the Hebrew, a heikal, and that is merely more like a wedding tent. And you might see that and that alone. And that's found in Isaiah 66:6, Malachi 3:1, and all throughout Zechariah 6, which is an end time section. So just keep that in mind as you look for things to occur in the future. Will we experience conformity to this mark of the beast? Hopefully you won't take the mark of the beast. Don't listen to any pastor that says take the mark of the beast, because they base that on once saved, always saved, and also on the pre-trib rapture. Don't believe those pastors. Don't believe those people. Believe people like me that tell you do not, because that is scriptural. That is exactly what Scripture says. Do not take that mark of the beast, or you will be consigned to hell forever. What you will also see is, I believe, the red heifer popping up before we go into the tribulation and being burned, probably on a Nissan too, just like it says in the Torah, and the dedication probably in the spring. If it is the spring, it would be a tabernacle. If it is in the fall, you would see probably a temple being built. They might try to build a temple, but I don't think they'll get that far. So you'll see these patterns. Just keep them in mind. This is more of a randoms pattern video because we're dealing with the end of this series. And because they're videos and I don't feel like recreating each one back with certain pieces that I found now recently, this is the way it works out. This is kitchen sink type time. Everybody has a theory, and all of them are wrong. I've been wrong a few times too. Okay, I truly thought things would evolve after 2015, and they did not. Most modern prophets are wrong. They mix a good, truthful message from God with their own emotions. Say the blood moon. Haggai said, "Oh yeah, that's the end of time right there." And I'll list off a few more of these things. The Jubilee year of 2017. Well, 2015 didn't end it. 2017 didn't end it. We're in 2019 right now, and I expect to see a 2020 and a 2021. So I've debunked many of these false prophets, but I can't debunk Mark Biltz. He is a Torah scholar, and he's a brilliant, wonderful man. I can't debunk Sadhu Severage either, Sundar Severage. I can't. They're wonderful men. They're godly men, and they're prophesying. Mark, not so much. He's not claiming that he's prophesying, but yet he is, because he's saying the words of God. And so there's foretelling and forthtelling. Forthtelling is more like preaching the word of God. Foretelling is, I have a message from God, and if you believe in cessationism, then you believe all of these things are lies. But if you're a continuationist like me, that God's gifts never ended, we fell away, it wasn't God's fault, it was us, then you're a continuationist, and then these messages are coming, but sometimes they mix together because we have our own little mission too. And sometimes we don't realize that it's God that's holy, and we kind of contaminate his message. So just keep that in mind. The most important thing for Sadhu is that he is in this region of the world that has so many people near India. And so God is blessing him with extra special messages right now. But the most important one that I'm going to start out with today is David Wilkerson. He seems to be the most accurate. Most of the eschatologists that I agree with are David Wilkerson fans. They put him on the top of the list. There's David. He died in a tragic death in 2011. That is hard for me to reconcile. Normally, prophets die in more of a peaceful way, shalom way. He lived kind of a tragic life in many ways. He was the weeping prophet, but he died tragically in an auto crash. He died immediately. His wife died even more tragically later on. So he was convinced that there would be an earthquake at some point in time, maybe in California, maybe not. It's going to take place where you least expect it. This will be a terrible earthquake, and it will happen in an area not known for an earthquake belt, and it will be high on the Richter scale so that it will trigger other major earthquakes. David Wilkerson wrote the book in 1973, The Vision. Most eschatologists use that almost as their Bible. So woe number one, according to David Wilkerson, is at most a few more fat, flourishing years will occur. And we've gone through those years. Then an economic recession that's going to affect the lifestyle of every wage earner in the world. The world's economics professors are going to be at a loss to explain what's happening. It's going to start in Europe, spread to Japan, and then finally to the United States. I'm going to repeat that. Start in Europe, spread to Japan, and finally to the United States. That seems to be an accurate pattern. There will be a move toward a worldwide unified monetary system. It will be probably not Bitcoin, but the blockchain technology. Blockchain is a snapshot of where the money is traveling to. And so you can easily keep the integrity of the system based on all of these snapshots of what's going on. And it's an amazing technology. It really can't be broken right now, and it seems to be part of the beast system. It's ready to go, too. Keep that in mind. Blockchain is very much ready to go with many different currencies. We don't know which one, but as things fall apart economically, they'll go to this currency, because what's money worth when it isn't worth anything? Nature will have labor pains. Environmentalists will come under heavy criticism. Well, the sun drives everything, and God drives everything through the sun. So keep in mind, 99% of whatever you experience on the earth is based on what the sun and the cosmos is doing, not on you spitting in the ocean. There will be major earthquakes, there will be major famine, floods, hurricanes, and tornadoes will increase in frequency. Wilkerson came back in '85 and added to this and said, America is going to be destroyed by fire. Sudden destruction is coming, and few will escape. Unexpectedly, in 1 hour, a hydrogen holocaust will engulf America, and its nation will be no more. It is because America has sinned against the greatest light, against the light that never goes out, which is Yeshua, and other nations are just as sinful, but none have been as flooded with the gospel light as ours. An attack from Russia, and the great Holocaust follows, an economic collapse in America. Other key points from Wilkerson, from the vision. From the time the first country goes down, you'll have about 2 weeks to get your money out of the bank. America will come through this crisis. There will be a restoration, not a complete restoration, but a partial. The nation will never be like it was before. God is saying, get your lives straight, get rid of the idols, seek the face of God in holiness. God will be a wall of fire about you, and the glory in the midst of you. According to my research, Sadhu Sundar Severage is the most accurate man alive today. And he isn't a god to me or anything like that. He's just a nice, wonderful man that professes love in Yeshua and gives some interesting prophetic messages. His most recent messages say the time of the two witnesses is soon. It's months, not years, and then they will release that anointing. So where does he minister? Primarily in this circle over here, that reddish area off to the right, and that's India, China, Indonesia, those areas down there with the big population centers. So let's look at it this way. You can see very little in North America, even less in Latin America and the Caribbean. Europe has quite a bit of a population in Africa too, but Asia, 4.545 billion people, and nothing hardly in Oceania. So that's our world population of 7.probably 8 billion right now. And here's another picture of it: China with 1.4 billion, India 1.3 billion, and then all of these other countries over there. You've got many billions of people over there, and that's where Sadhu is ministering. That's why God is blessing him right now. This is a chart that shows from 1950 until 2100 and where the population is going to be. Notice how it's growing in Africa, growing in Asia, and it's shrinking everywhere else. So expect those to be the areas, and so God wants to send missionaries like Sadhu Sundar Severage to those areas so that he can have many come to himself. So that's why if you wonder, why are things delaying right now? Why are guys like Joel Blackford and Mark Biltz and others wrong right now on the timing? And we're not really wrong. We never prophesied anything. We just thought things would happen sooner. It's because God is still working through people like Sadhu, and he's doing a marvelous job. So now we need to move into the scientific area, the cosmological area. Is it cosmological changes or catastrophe cycles? So are we just going through random changes here, or is it going to be a catastrophe? Let's analyze it. The people that I analyze are Ben Davidson with Suspicious Observers. I get up every morning and I watch a 2 to 3 minute video from him at this website. And then what else I do is I have his app, a disaster prediction app, so that I can see where the earthquakes are going and I can kind of follow the trend of where they're going to. Because I have friends and family that live in these areas and I want to be able to warn them beforehand. He also cites this, which is from Planet X News. I know I'm not a big Planet X guy, but this is an interesting source. What they're saying is the CIA has done studies on Earth's catastrophe cycles, and they have declassified some of that information. So this is from one of Ben's friends. And also, I should mention that I cite Dutch Sense, a fellow from the Missouri area. I do look at his videos. They're an hour long. But they're worth it if I know that things are happening in the world. So this is from Chan Thomas. This is from that Planet X News. And he wrote the Adam and Eve story many, many years ago. And so he said there seems to be this repetitive 12,000-year record of magnetic reversal mass death events. And then I'm telling you, this is from me. Adam was created outside the garden in Genesis 2:8. He was placed inside. Damascus and Babylon date back about 10,000 years. When you look at the Torah scrolls, when you look at the actual scrolls, and the rabbis are real careful to do things exactly the way they saw it originally. There's a big bait before in Genesis, and there is no aleph, the first letter of the alphabet, before that. That seems to be the silent story. So we don't know if we're actually dealing with a 12,000-year creation story or not. But I'm telling you that Babylon and Damascus go back about 10,000 years because of good records. Cataclysms and literal Bible interpretations are compatible because Noah's flood, Sodom and Gomorrah, Revelation all occurred in the Bible. So we know that God deals with cataclysms. Okay, so this documents from one source, New World Encyclopedia, that Damascus seems to be inhabited about 8,000 to 10,000 years ago. That's longer than 6,000. So, I wish I could be a young Earth creationist, but I can't be because I can see that Damascus was there and in existence and that Adam was created outside of the garden. And also Babylon. Goes back about 10,000 years. So keep that in mind. These both go back a long, long time, and they have always had people living in, say, Damascus, not so much Babylon, but they've had people in these areas for about 8, 10,000 years, but longer than 6,000 definitely. This is Chan Thomas's article, his book, and he says frozen mammoths, then the Grand Canyon, then blah 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 blah, then the Greek alphabet that trigger the next cataclysm. And he says about every 12,000 years this just happens. Get used to it. So he goes back 12,000 years, then 23,000 years, then 33.5 thousand years, then 47,000 years, and he cites them as the Gothenburg, the Mona Lake, the Lake Mungo, and the Leschamp. So he's saying these things have happened before. Get used to it. This is a repetitive cycle of magnetic reversals. Another person that espouses about the same thing is Dr. Paul Lavalliette, and he has been looking for these super waves that seem to have these ELEs that occur, these extinction level events that occur. So that's Paul, and he says what happens in his 5 rules of catastrophe are core explosion arrives. Cosmic rays bombard the Earth and Sun. The Sun activates super flares. Magnetic field reverses. Then the ELE, the extinction level event, occurs, and then it starts over again. So we're going to go into the sociology side of this, the social studies, which is from Anglin Jones, and then another person after this too. In her book, Holding Up the Mirror, she says, this is how civilizations decline. In the early stages of civilizations, for example, men and women were very dominated by the anxiety and the need to placate whatever the unseen powers were that seemed to be, to them, ultimately responsible for their lives. Their anxieties were very basic ones. Would the crops ripen? Would the river flood? Would the children look after you in your old age? Would disease, drought, famine, enemies destroy the village? This is why they were deeply religious. Everything was sacred. Stones, streams, rivers, trees, groves, God, a God of heaven. Some of them believed in that. Some of them believed in this. All belonging to the gods who must not be upset. They were trying to keep their peace with the ultimate dynamics of the world. Then they grow up. And so this is another social scientist called Peturim Sorokin. And he's saying in his social and cultural dynamics, his magnum opus, he classified societies according to their cultural mentality, which is ideational, which is reality is spiritual, sensate, reality is material, idealistic, the synthesis of the two. He suggested that major civilizations evolved from an ideational to the idealistic and eventually to the sensate mentality. Each of these phases of cultural development not only seeks to describe the nature of reality, but also stipulates the nature of human needs and goals to be satisfied, the extent to which they should be satisfied, and the methods of satisfaction. Sorokin has interpreted the contemporary Western civilization as a sensate civilization dedicated to technological progress. That's our God today, unfortunately. Your iPhone is your God. And prophesied its fall into decadence and the emergence of a new ideational and idealistic era. In Fads and Foibles, he criticizes Lewis. Well, basically he says that someone said, no, this doesn't work out this way. But you know what? His idea is that we just evolve through these different cycles. And we fall down and we get back up again. We fall down and we get back up again. Now, this is Toynbee. He studied most of the civilizations, and he did this over about a 40-year time frame. So of the 22 civilizations that have appeared in history, 19 of them collapsed when they reached the moral state the United States is in now. That's Toynbee. So here's the 19. I'll let you read them for yourself. Egyptian, Andean, Sinaitic, Minoan, Sumerian, all of these, okay? Orthodox Christian, main body, Persian, Eskimo, and then he also studies some of these arrested civilizations, Polynesian, Eskimo. So these are all of these 19 major civilizations, and he studied it for many, many years. So he wrote a 12-volume universal history, and everybody loved this until they started to rip it apart. He published it from 34 until 1961. It was popular, people. It was very, very popular. It was vogue. And then it became obscure because people need more than that. They want to see what's going to happen now. And also, when you're the guy that's doomsaying, you're not always that popular. So he said, what you should see, these are the stages: Genesis, growth, time of troubles, universal state, and disintegration. That's from Wiki. This is another person. We'll call him an economics person. Richard Branson in the middle, and his buddy there, Mike Dillard. And he says there are 7 phases of empires. And these guys all agree, and they're the money guys. They're the guys telling you, buy gold right now or silver right now. Okay? So he says good money is backed by gold and silver. Then the social programs grow. Then military expenditures come. Then the military expenditures explode. Then they steal wealth by offering printable currencies. Every country has done this over history. Then price inflation driven especially by a central bank. And right now, yeah, he's saying a certain figure right now for us, because he's saying in this particular curve that we are right between 6 and 7 in America right now. Then finally, the last phase is movement to hard currencies and assets as printable currencies dies. Now, I'm saying there's a new world order of people that really control all of this, and they know when things are going to crash. And they know this time around, they're not going to confiscate, they're going to confiscate your gold and silver and everything like that, not just your printable cash, which is worthless. They know what's going on this time, that we're going into a blockchain currency of some sort that will be crypto. And so, just as Joseph P. Kennedy knew when the stock market was going to crash in 1921 and he switched out, this time they know that, and they know that we're going to switch to gold and silver, and they will block that this time. So keep that in mind. You do not have a way around these guys this time. Okay. This is interesting. This is something I just found. This is from, once again, probably my gold guys, but on September 20th of 2017, it was Elul 295777. If you follow Jonathan Kahn, he said on Elul 29, which is the end of the year of 2001, and Elul 29, the end of the year again on 2008, the markets crashed by like 20% or something like that. So those crashes occurred. In this case, Janet Yellen decided to start cutting the 4.5 trillion balance sheet of her. They were doing the stimulus thing to prevent the second Great Depression. So Yellen said, well, it's 2017, it's a little 29, nobody's noticing. Let's start cutting it right now. So they literally set off the chain event for what's going to implode at some point in time. I don't know when it's going to happen, but it's interesting that it took a decade for Yellen to do this, and now she went from 2007, where they started to make the stimulus to try to save everything, and they haven't saved anything at all. They've really screwed up the economy. Whatever you think is going on in the world today is just a facade. This is an opinion from Tyler Durden, which is really this is I'm blanking on it completely, on Zero Hedge. Okay, so Zero Hedge is saying that this is all related, and this reset is going to occur, and that Yellen kicked off horrible events. So this is their article from 3/13 of 2019. And now this is from Zero Hedge. So let's read the article itself, and just a little cutout here. So cycles are perhaps the most natural and common occurrence in the universe. The planets orbit the sun, seasons change, days turn into night, and night back into day. Humans are born, grow old, and die. Some of these cycles are more pleasant to think about than others, but their consistent occurrence remains factually unassailable. Indeed, it could be said that human life itself consists of an endless series of encounters with various cycles. Cycles of the natural world, and cycles created by humans ourselves. Equally significant is the generational cycle. Birth rates are at a 30-year low, in part because millennials are too broke and too in debt to buy homes and start a family. This is now the largest voting bloc in American politics, and I highly doubt they'll just sit around and continue to get systematically fleeced well into their 30s. This is why socialism, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and her ilk, they're becoming very popular right now, because we are in big trouble, and Yellen is causing this. They're bankrupting the kids and the people that would be buying the houses and buying the cars and buying the other things like that, and they're fleecing everybody else, and they're creating just a few rich people, and that's all they're going to do. And at some point in time, there will be a revolt, and that's why you're seeing this weird socialism popping up right now. Now we move on to something that is completely different. Remember, this is the kitchen sink of videos for this series. Gematria or numerology. They're either guesses, but it's either or. The main thing is numerology is a Christian variety. Gematria is tending to be Hebrew and Jewish. Each letter, like an aleph on the far left there, is a 1, and the beit is a 2, and the gimel is a 3, and then all the way down to the tav is a 400. And so if you look at each one of your letters in the Torah, in the Bible, you will see that it's associated with numbers, like a 666 in Revelation 13. Well, it's very interesting to look at it, so let's see what's going on with this. This is from Isaac Newton, and so he's taking numerology this direction. He's saying, based on his knowledge of the Bible, he's looking at 2300, which is from Daniel 8, and he's saying if you subtract that, in this case 2300 or 1260, from the year 2060, you will equal 800 Common Era. And he says at that point in time, 3 kings, I think it is, populate the world. So I want you to see how he's using gematria or numerology to figure out that the little horn popped out in 800, and it's just very odd how they. This is typical, though, guys. Okay, I don't use this style to come up with my research and my analysis. Okay, but he's using this, and he's saying the times half a time, which is 42 months or 1260 days or 3 years and a half, or he's reckoning 12 months to a year and 30 days to a month was done on the calendar in the primitive year. And so this sets up this time of the beast, Three Kings. There it is, from AC 800 will end in 2060. So the end of the world will be 2060 based on Isaac Newton, the smartest man ever in the history of the world. Well, he's wrong. Sorry, it's not going to be 2060, but it was a good guess. This is another numerologist and a lady that says she's a prophet. She left the Methodist Church like I did. I left for different reasons. She left because she predicted the end of the world in 1843, 1844, and she was wrong. They were working off a different calendar. They were setting up all of these numerology things, and she was plagiarizing too from Newton and other people like that. So, this is what Ellen White is saying. On September 23rd, the Lord showed me that he had stretched out his hand the second time to recover the remnant of his people, and that the efforts must be redoubled in this gathering time. In the scattering, Israel was smitten and torn, but now in the gathering time, God will heal and bind up his people. In the scattering, efforts were made to spread the truth, but had little effect, accomplished little or nothing. But in the gathering, when God has set his hand to gather his people, efforts to spread the truth will have their designed effect. All should be united and zealous in their work. I saw that it was wrong for any to refer to the scattering for examples to govern us now in the gathering. For if God should do no more for us now than he did then, Israel will never be gathered. She's basically predicting a few different times that Israel would never be regathered and that the Jews would never move back to Israel. Jerusalem would never be rebuilt. She's wrong. She's wrong. So that makes her a false prophet. I had seen the 1843 chart was directed by the hand of the Lord, and it should not be altered, that the figures were as he wanted them, and that his hand was over and hid. So God hid a mistake from them. What? She's declaring that God made a mistake and hid a mistake, and so you could not see it until his hand was removed. This is actually from her children. This is their website that they maintain her earliest books, and the first version of it too. So then I saw in relation to the daily that the word sacrifice was supplied by man's wisdom. No, it's there in the text, Ellen. You can't read Hebrew. And does not belong in the text. Well, it does. And that the Lord gave the correct view of it to those who gave the judgment our cry. When the Union existed before 1844, nearly all were united in the correct view of the daily, but in the confusion since 1844, other views have been embraced. In the darkness and the confusion that followed, time has not been a test since 1844. So we're not having time. It's not a test, and it will never be again a test. While no specific date is given in the official belief statements, many Adventists hold October 22nd of 1844 as the starting date for investigative judgment. That is their way of saying that they are investigating God, that he made a mistake, that he was supposed to show up in 1843, 1844. And so that's their statement mocking God. And then she's citing the founder, Miller, the Millerites, set the end of the 2300 days between March 21st of 1843 and March 21st of 1844. In mid-1844, Miller of the Millerites said, I confess my error and acknowledge my disappointment, yet I still believe that the day of the Lord is near. And then Samuel Snow began preaching at the end. The 2300 days would be in the fall of 1844. You'll find that when people are wrong, they just keep on recreating dates. Okay, they never stop. They just keep on setting another date. And that's the problem with the SDAs. They just kept on setting, resetting, setting, resetting. And once you get hooked on this, it's like a drug. Okay, when you start setting dates, it's a drug, and you just have to set one more date. We'll show you that in a little while. Okay, so they're blaming God, and that is what investigative judgment is from the SDA Church. It is horrific. And this comes from CRI, which is the Christian Research Institute. The crisis that exists within SDA today is essentially, it centers around the investigative judgment, an unbiblical doctrine, which severely compromises, if not outright denies, the biblical doctrine of justification by faith. Second only to investigative judgment, that issue is the all-encompassing question of the inspiration and authority of the writings of Ellen White. She's been proven wrong time and time again. The controversy which has raged regarding regarding the writings of Mrs. White has undoubtedly shaken the entire structure of the SDA. So this Millerite movement concluded to their satisfaction that the end of the 1260-day prophecy of Daniel 25 in 1798 started the era of the time of the end. The next considered the 2300 days of Daniel 8:14. So they were wrong, but they couldn't stop. And even to this day, they're preaching some of the same things time and time again because they're hooked on that drug of date setting and their eschatology, which if you hear the phrase, the spirit of prophecy says, that means Ellen White trumps the scriptures. Just keep that in mind. Okay, so now let's pick out some other people that are oddballs, gadflies, and guessers. Martin Luther said the end of the world is 1600. The Watchtower, the Jehovah's Witnesses. 1843, they were Millerites. And 1844, yep, they were Millerites. 1878, 1881, 1914, 1918, 1925, and 1975. I was around for that. I have relatives that are Jehovah's Witnesses. And they did predict the end of the world in 1975. And they were wrong again. Stop it. But they can't stop. Branham, he was a weird preacher from the 40s. He said 1977 will be the end. Chuck Smith, yes, Calvary Chapel, he said 1981. Edgar Whisenhunt, 88 reasons for 1988 because it's 40 years after 1948. Well, then he came back the next year in 1989 and said 89 reasons for 1989. They can't stop, it's a drug. Edgar Casey, kind of a mystic. Jerry Falwell, who was the moral majority guy. Tim LaHaye, nice guy. Jerry Jenkins, an absolute jerk of a man, a gambler. And he was the guy that gambled and helped bring down James McDonald in Chicago. A hideous man, a fiction writer thinking that he's writing something important for people, and all he's trying to do is steal your money so he can gamble. He said 2000. All of them said 2000. Harold Camping, I remember driving to Denver in 2011 and viewing these billboards. Harold Camping saying, 7,000 years after Noah's flood, May 21st, 2011, that's when Jesus is returning. Well, he's dead now and Jesus hasn't returned. David Mead talks about Nibiru, which is this planet that's supposed to cause all sorts of atmospheric problems. And also there was the 120th Jubilee year in 2017. So this is from Wikipedia. It's the list of dates predicted for apocalyptic events. The main thing is they've all been wrong. I don't predict a date, okay? I see that we're getting close right now, but I don't predict dates, nor does some of the people that I truly, truly love, Sadhu Sundar Severage, Mark Biltz, others like that. We don't predict dates. We just don't. We have to discuss this just because Orwell has been important, and these are interesting guesses. He really thought everything centered around 1914, World War I. So he said the end will come between 2040 and 2064. And Orwell, I like his quote, where, and I'm paraphrasing, that all of the animals in the animal farm are equal, but some are more equal than others. People living up until 1914 had something never prevalent again and never again after 1914. Before 1914, the future was something you didn't need to be terrified at that point in time. But after 1914, and especially after 1945, you knew that you could have World War I, World War II, and we'll have World War III at some point in time. I'm amazed we've had 70-ish years of peace, but we know people worked harder, more people were living in poverty, but life was much better somehow before 1914, and he is correct with that. It's like they had a peace of mind, a feeling of security. They had a real life at that point in time. They had religious belief, they went to church, they had manufacturing. It was more primitive, but it was a better life, people. It was than what we have right now, glued to our iPhones. Okay, in his novel of 1984, if you want a picture of the future, imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever. We shall meet in the place where there is no darkness. So Buckminster Fuller states it this way. He says that up until the year 1900, human knowledge doubled approximately every century. But by the end of World War II, knowledge was doubling every 25 years. We're now doubling our knowledge in less than a year, but according to IBM, we will soon be doubling our knowledge every 12 hours. And the military is supposed to be years ahead of the rest of us. And that knowledge, and we can't rid the world of poverty. So think about it. We're acquiring all this information and knowledge. How are we doing on the war on poverty? Not so good. And criminal activity, how are we doing? No, more criminal activity. So you could be precogs and still have crime. So we may be smarter, but we're more dangerous. That's the one thing that we are. What is Moore's law? You need to have this in our compilation of these final phases and patterns. Moore's law is the observation made by Intel co-founder Gordon Moore that the number of transistors on a chip doubles every 2 years while the costs are halved. In 1965, Gordon Moore noticed that the number of transistors per square inch on the integrated circuits had doubled every 2 years since their invention. Moore's law predicts that this trend will continue until the foreseeable future. Although the recent pace has slowed for Moore's law, the doubling of the installed transistors on silicon chips occurs closer to every 18 months instead of every 2 years. The 18-month mark is the current definition of Moore's law. So let's look at what he predicted. And it's pretty typical there, okay? This is what actually has happened over the last, since 1970, as we've been working with chips. And you can see it's pretty close to what he predicted. The double the count, halving in the price. And you see that in your electronic devices, other than iPhones. They seem to get more expensive, but I think that's based on greed. So I want to include something else in here. We've been dealing with some of the scientific issues, the sociological issues, and we're doing the kitchen sink. So this is from 2 Baruch 27, where he's making a case that 6,000 years are divided into 12 parts. And a scholar by the name of the Sefer, oh goodness, I'm blanking on his name right now. He's the one that purports this. So wonderful man. And so God answered and said to me, that time will be divided into 12 parts, about 500 years each. And each part has been preserved for that which is appointed. In the first part, the beginning of the commotions. In the second part, the slaughterings of the great. These are the Nephilim, according to him. In the third part, the fall of many unto death. The fourth part, the drawing of the sword. In the fifth part, famine and the withholding of rain. In the sixth part, earthquakes and terrors. 7 is wanting. Eighth part, a multitude of ghosts and the appearances of demons. Ninth part, the fall of fire. The 10th part, rape and much violence. The 11th part, injustice and unchastity. 12th part, disorder and the mixture of all that has been before. These parts of that time will be preserved and will be mixed one with another, and they will minister to each other. For some of these parts will withhold a part of themselves and take from others, and will accomplish that which belongs to them and to others. Hence, those who live on the earth in those days will not understand that it is the end of times, because it'll be a mixture. So this is from the Sefer people, and it's very, very interesting to notice 2 Baruch did mention something about these patterns over 6,000 years. This is from Enoch, so that's why I'm citing this together with that particular section. And so Enoch, but it's an interpretation from the guys at the Big Wobble. So I don't know if I agree with it or not, but this is their interpretation of it. 70 Jewish shepherds would rule Israel, divided into 3 time frames, 35 and 23 and 12. And Enoch, the last 12 would come during the tribulation period. So really we're looking at the 35 and the 23. So the first part is 20 shepherds, 11 being Gentile empires. And so there's a gap. Let's just look at it this way on the second page. Enoch's first total of 35 shepherds, the gap with a gap of 12, is the Gentiles, foreign empires. So the first time frame of 35 is covered. 20 Jewish kings, 14 Maccabees, and the Bar Kokhba in about 135 AD. Brings us the first 35 shepherds. Okay, that works. Then Enoch's dream has a vision of a modern Israel, which came to fruition in 1948. Enoch prophesied modern Israel would consist of 23 rulers, prime ministers, and 58 governments. A total of 12 Jewish leaders during this 12 tribulational period, too. There are 3 ways to interpret this, according to the Big Wobble guys. So since 1948, we've had 18 prime ministers of modern Israel, and the prophesied 23 total. So 34 governments, halfway point. So based on his math, he thinks the end of the world is 2054, when the tribulation would occur. Maybe 2072. So his math is very interesting. He's saying where 61 is halfway to the number of 122. So 1948 plus 122 is 2070. Interesting. Okay, so his math is 2054, 2070, 2064. Those seem to be the end of days. So he's kind of similar to Isaac Newton. Remember that? I don't agree with their logic, but it's interesting to note that they think this based on Enoch's dream. Okay, so their conclusion, 1908, the devil was thrown down to earth. Interesting. During the Tunguska event? I don't remember that. 1914, the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse open up. I claim that that started in 1967. 1948, the birth of modern Israel. Okay, that works. Okay, 2040, the day of Armageddon according to the 7,000-year prophecy. 2064, the end of days according to Enoch's dream of 70 shepherds. Interesting. Okay, so that's the big wobble. This is from the Catholic Church, and they have their own set of eschatology. So let's look at it from the Pope's vision of 1884 of the 13th of October, which is interesting. So you had 33 years and you come to 1917, which is the time frame when we have these weird, eerie Mary visitations to Fatima, Portugal. Fatima was the daughter of Muhammad. The Muslims controlled Portugal and parts of Spain for many, many years until they were booted out in 1492. So the 13th of May of 1917 corresponds to the 13th of May 2017 when the Pope arrives in Fatima. Okay, interesting. Then June, July, August is a 19th there, but really it was the 13th. The kids were sick, so it was set up to be the 13th each month. And keep in mind, God generally doesn't work with little kids, but when you have demonic apparitions, then you're working with kids because they can be confused. Then in October of 1917, and I'm saying October of 2017, you have this interesting 8th day. And so I don't know. This just was weird because in October 13th of 1917, there was a UFO that popped up and 70,000 people saw it. So just be aware of that weird trend and that we're 100 years past that. Now, we have to cover St. Malachy. And one of my friends from years ago until he died was Chris Putnam, and he was a co-writer with Tom Horn. And they wrote on the 112 prophecies of St. Malachy, who was alive about 1,000 to about 1,100, and from Ireland, but not an Irish fellow. So he wrote, and he was highly inaccurate on the first 60-ish of these popes because they rewrote their commentaries. Hey, I'm taller than that. I'm more beautiful than that. I'm a great thinker, you know? And so they would rewrite all of their stuff. But then after that, this fell into disfavor. And so these popes are accurate here towards the end. So Paul the Sixth was fleur-de-lis. Well, his coat was the fleur-de-lis. And so he was the flower of flowers. Of the half moon, John Paul I, well, he lived a month, and he came in on the half moon, went out on the half moon. From the labor of the sun, well, John Paul was born on a solar eclipse and died on a solar eclipse. Very interesting. The glory of the olive, well, he was a Benedictine. He was called Benedict, the 16th. So then now the final pope. This is Petrus Romanus, we call him, and he is Pope Francis. And according to what St. Malachy wrote about 1,000 years ago about him, he said, the final persecution of the Holy Roman Church, there will sit Peter the Roman, who will pasture his sheep in many tribulations. And when these things are finished, the city of 7 hills will be destroyed, and the dreadful judge will judge his people. The end. Now, that's according to Chris Putnam. That's what he read in the report from St. Malachy. Very interesting. This is Catholic eschatology of their trends. And according to them, Peter the Roman, Pope Francis, is the last pope. And according to other sources, which are very interesting, he is the false prophet. Now, this is my theory. First, I'll give you the verses. 1,000 years in your sight are like a day that has just gone by, or like a watch in the night. That's from Psalm 90, verse 4. But do not forget this one thing, dear friends. With the Lord, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years are like a day. That's 2 Peter 3:8. So according to Yeshua, through these verses, we should be able to say 2030 minus 2,000 years is 30 Common Era when he died and resurrected. So minus 7 years, though, in this case, would be 2023. We're getting kind of close to that, but the problem with that is that's death and resurrection. That's not really when the kingdom started. His kingdom started in about 26.5 AD, which 2,000 years later would be 2026.5, and you take off 7 years from that, and you're in 2019.5. That's where we are right now. We're about halfway through the year. And if you look around, do you see the snowstorms? Do you see the rain? Do you see the floods? Do you see the fires? Do you see all the natural disasters? Do you see all sorts of things happening? Now, I'm not saying that we're going to go into tribulation this year and then, 7 years later, Yeshua will return. I'm saying that it could happen. Think months, not years to go. Woe to you that want the day of Adonai, this final at the end of the 7 years. Why do you want it? This is the day of Adonai. It's darkness, not light, as if someone were to run from a lion just to be met by a bear, as if he entered a house, put his hand on the wall just to be bitten by a snake. Won't the day of Adonai be darkness and not light, completely dark with no brightness at all? That's from Amos 5:18 through 20. So one other little point, I want to end up with just a few things. Once again, this is our kitchen sink video of all of these videos, the 8th one here. The rule of 3, how long can you survive? You can survive 3 minutes without air, without oxygen, or in icy water. You can survive for, I've lasted longer than 3 minutes in icy water. I'm from Lindstrom, Minnesota, and I had to go save my dog from the ice. He fell through the ice and I had to go save him. So I probably lasted 20, 30 minutes getting my dog out. Anyway, but I'm also very hardy. So you can survive for 3 hours without shelter in a harsh environment unless it's icy water. You can survive for 3 days without water if sheltered from a harsh environment. You can survive 3 weeks without food if you have water and shelter. So remember the rules of 3. We are done with video number 8. Thank you for giving us your time. I hope that you've appreciated all of the research that we've put into these videos and all the thought that we've put into them, and we hope that you'll be blessed by them. Good night.